The Middle East crisis has just shaken the global economy. Oil prices are through the roof right now, and suddenly every government on earth is nervous as hell about just one thing. Can the US wrap this war up in weeks like it says it can, or are we looking at something much bigger, and are we looking at a geopolitical crisis that drags on for months and months and pushes the world toward another global economic recession? So if you are sitting at home watching this unfold, you're probably feeling that weird mix of fear and confusion because every headline is screaming something different and nobody seems to agree on what happens next. Hey guys, it's Scott here. Now, everywhere you look right now, there is chaos all over our planet. There are thousands of articles and interviews coming out every hour contradicting each other. One article says the RBA might hike interest rates because oil prices are rising. Another says the RBA might not. You turn on the TV and you see politicians arguing with each other like little school kids, while half the YouTube videos you see are pure clickbait, waste of time. So you're probably thinking, what the hell is the truth? What is going on? And how should I prepare for what comes next? So this is why I'm making this video for you. In this video, I'm going to cut through all of the BS, cut through all of the noise, and walk you through the real economic side of this crisis. I am not going to get into geopolitical arguments about who's right and wrong. Are we making the right decisions? That is a completely different conversation. What I am going to do is break this down economically and explain how this could impact you, your finances, your money, your everyday life, and also your financial future. Now, one of the world's largest economic research firms has already laid out 3 different scenarios for how this crisis could unfold. I will show you what those scenarios mean and how you should prepare for them. I will also discuss interest rates because the RBA could move in 2 different directions from here. I will give you the full picture, so watch till the end. Now, before we get into it, I cover the Australian economy and property every single day in these daily property updates. So if you want to stay informed and stay ahead of the curve, hit subscribe and hit the bell icon so you can become a property insider. All right, let's get into it. So first, let's quickly talk about what is actually happening right now. The US and Israel have struck Iran. Iran has retaliated, and the region is now sitting on a very dangerous escalation path. You've seen the clips of Aussies stranded all throughout the Middle East. Nobody can confidently tell you how far this goes or for how long it lasts. But economically speaking, the war itself is not the biggest issue. The real economic threat is oil and gas supply. And everything right now comes down to one tiny strip of water that most people never think about: the Strait of Hormuz. This narrow shipping route between Iran and Oman is one of the most important choke points in the global economy. Around 20% of the world's oil supply moves through it every single day. It is vitally important. It carries oil from multiple countries across the Middle East. And when that corridor becomes unstable, shipping insurance jumps, vessels reroute, delays start building, and suddenly global supply tightens very quickly. It is not just oil moving through that route either. Liquefied natural gas moves through it. Fertilizers move through it. Container trade moves through it. About 1/3 of global fertilizer trade passes through this corridor, which becomes important later when we talk about food prices. Remember, here in Australia, we produce a lot of food. It's one of our biggest exports, and we need fertilizer. Now, here is why Australia cares. Asian economies rely heavily on Middle Eastern energy, and Australia's economy is deeply tied to Asia. So when energy costs spike across Asia, the ripple effects move through the entire region, and it does impact us here at home. Which brings us to the obvious question: why does oil matter so much to everyday Aussies? So this is common sense, really. Oil sits right at the center of the global economy. When oil prices rise and stay high, transport costs rise across the entire economic system. That flows into freight, logistics, deliveries, aviation, and eventually the prices of everyday goods, including your own personal travel. Petrol is the most obvious place where Aussies feel it. Analysts have already warned that if oil moves toward $100 US a barrel, petrol prices in Australia could rise by 30 to 40 cents per litre within days. That's massive. But petrol is only the first domino. Diesel powers freight and trucking across the economy, which means groceries, deliveries, and trade services become more expensive when diesel costs rise. Even if businesses do not raise prices immediately, they eventually pass those costs on to the end buyer. Fertilizer is another hidden channel. About 1/3 of global fertilizer trade flows through the Strait of Hormuz. The fertilizer is essential for agriculture. If fertilizer costs rise, farming costs rise, and that eventually feeds into food prices, not to mention the cost of the diesel and the petrol. Something as simple as bread becomes more expensive. Travel is another area that gets hit quickly. So let's take a look at this and understand this. A conflict thousands of kilometers away suddenly shows up in very ordinary places. Petrol stations, supermarkets, airfares, delivery fees. Which brings us to the next big question: how bad could this actually get? Now, one of the world's largest modeling firms, Oxford Economics, has already run scenario testing on this conflict. They looked at 3 different outcomes depending on how long this disruption lasts. In the first scenario, the disruption is mostly limited to Iranian oil supply. Since Iran produces around 4% of global oil, global markets could adjust through strategic reserves and increase supply from other producers. Oil could rise toward $100 US per barrel. Inflation could rise slightly, but the overall economic impact would remain manageable. We may not even feel it. In the second scenario, shipping through the Strait of Hormuz is disrupted for about a month. That is where the pressure really builds. Oil could rise towards $113 US per barrel. Australian inflation could increase by about 1 percentage point, and economic growth could slow slightly. This is still manageable, but households would definitely feel the squeeze. The third scenario is the one absolutely nobody wants. If the disruption lasts 3 months or longer, oil prices could blow out towards $140 US per barrel. Under that scenario, inflation rises sharply. Global growth will slow down. Financial markets will become very volatile. The interesting part is that oil prices have already moved. Brent crude jumped sharply after the conflict escalated and has remained volatile ever since.
Hey guys, Scott here. Quick update. Oxford Economics has revised their scenario testing, and they have now added a scenario 4, which is the downside case. This is the one where tensions de-escalate fast, nuclear talks deliver a breakthrough, a US strike is avoided, and the risk around the strait fades. Under that scenario, the current geopolitical premium, roughly $9 a barrel, unwinds quickly, and oil drops back toward its fundamentals, around $63 a barrel, with further downside over the year if sanctions are eased and Iranian supply starts returning to the mainstream market.
A fascinating thing to note is that markets react to expectations. The oil currently sitting in Australia fuel tanks was not shipped through Hormuz yesterday, but traders price risk immediately. So the anticipation of supply disruption alone is enough to push prices higher. I mean, remember toilet paper during COVID. And this is where things get complicated for policymakers, because the next big question becomes interest rates. Right now, you are seeing completely conflicting headlines about interest rates. Some articles say the RBA might hike rates again. Others say they will not. The truth is that the Reserve Bank is watching 2 forces pulling in complete opposite directions. The first force is inflation pressure. Higher oil prices feed directly into petrol and transport costs, which can lift headline inflation. If energy prices stay high for long enough and start flowing into other goods and services, inflation expectations will 100% rise. That is something central banks cannot ignore. But there is a second force that you do need to understand and know about. When households see petrol rising, groceries rising, and uncertainty rising, they cut spending. People cancel travel, delay purchases, and pull back discretionary spending. When demand slows, inflation pressure can actually ease. This is exactly why RBA Governor Michelle Bullock has said the situation is very uncertain and the bank will be watching very closely what's happening and monitoring all of the numbers. Short-term oil spikes usually do not trigger interest rate hikes, but if the energy prices stay high for months and start pushing broader inflation higher, the risk of another rate increase will grow. At the same time, if global uncertainty slows economic activity, the RBA may choose to sit tight instead of adding more pressure to households. So the RBA is essentially waiting to see which of these forces will win. It could go this way, it could go that way. higher inflation, or slower growth. Global crises like this are outside your control. You cannot control wars, energy markets, or decisions made by world leaders, but you can control how you respond financially. Periods like this is when discipline matters most. Focus on protecting your cash flow. Reduce unnecessary spending where possible. If travel is optional, delaying it may save you from paying inflated prices. If online shopping is becoming a habit, cutting it back can quickly improve your financial buffer. Fuel prices may rise, groceries may rise, and uncertainty may stay elevated for a while. So building buffers wherever possible becomes incredibly important right now. But there is also a bigger long-term lesson here. Moments like this often expose the difference between people who rely purely on their earned income and savings and people who own and who invest in assets. Inflation tends to punish savers because the cost of living rises while the value of money erodes. Hard assets respond very differently to inflation. Take property as an example. If construction costs rise because materials, fuel, and freight become more expensive, building new housing becomes more expensive. When replacement costs rise, existing housing often becomes more valuable over time. That does not mean prices move overnight, but it does mean asset ownership can provide insulation when inflation rises. You have to understand the property market in Australia has been growing 6, 7, 8% every single year for many decades now. And that is right in line with the inflation on the cost of building new property. So there's a clear correlation in building costs and house price movement over time. And that is why moments like this highlight something very important for you. You cannot rely on central banks or the government to protect your financial future. You've got to make the right moves for you and take care of yourself. Global events like this remind us how connected the world really is. A conflict on the other side of the planet can end up affecting petrol prices, grocery bills, travel costs, and even interest rate decisions here in Australia. But Australia has weathered global shocks before, and the economy has historically proven incredibly resilient. The key for all Aussies is staying informed, staying disciplined with money, and thinking long-term instead of reacting emotionally to every headline. I hear all the time, I can't afford to invest. You cannot afford to not invest, because people who stay calm and make smart financial decisions during uncertain times, these will be the people who come out stronger on the other side 5-10 years from now. If you found this breakdown useful, hit subscribe and hit the bell so you do not miss future updates on property, the economy, and what it means for your financial future. This is your daily property update. I do these videos every single day so that you can become a property insider and make all the right moves for you and the people you care about. Leave a comment and tell me what you think will happen over the next 1, 2, 3 months with the conflict in Iran. And I'll see you guys at the next video.